Abba Kabir Yusuf of the NNPP from Kano State, Abdullahi Sule of the APC from Nasarawa State, Dauda Lawal of the PDP from Zamfara State, and Caleb Mutwang of the PDP from Plateau State. These four governors are in the eye of the storm right now and will most likely be heading to the Supreme Court after petitions arising from the 2023 general elections has led to the sack of at least 3 of these governors, and one of the elections deemed inconclusive. Is the judiciary a meddlesome interloper? Is INEC overwhelmed? Where are the fault lines in each of these cases? And on a larger scale, is it time to review this Western liberal democracy we're practicing in Nigeria? Former President Olusegun Obasanjo thinks so, and I wonder what my guest on the program today thinks about this. Hello and welcome to Political Paradigm, live from Channels Television's Abuja studios. I am Kayla Megwa. My guest on the program is Mr. Jide Ojo, a political analyst, and today he'll be helping us unpack the issues with these 4 governors and the elections that brought them to power, which are now being challenged. The Supreme Court governor syndrome seems to be deepening in Nigeria, putting more question marks on the trust the Nigerian has on the electoral process. Mr. Jide Ojo, welcome to Political Paradigm.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure.
I know I've read a few articles that you've said about this particular issue, and I want to be able to get your thoughts on them, at least on a broader scale, and to look at them one after the other. So let's start with Plateau State. What's really going on there? And of course, we hear people trying to make the distinction between primaries and party congresses, just so people can understand what the situation is.
Thank you very much, Kayla. Interesting times we are, particularly with our politics, and it's not totally unexpected. At least in the last 24 years, since we began this 4th Republic, it's been from one drama to the other at every electoral cycle. And it's when you cast your mind back to 1999, 2003, 2007, in fact, in 2007, it was worse. It was worse that there are 13 nullifications in 2007, both at the lower court and at the appellate court. As at that time, election petition did not go to Supreme Court, at least for governorship. The only one that goes to Supreme Court the election of the president, which starts from the Court of Appeal as Court of First Instance, then the Supreme Court. In Plateau State, there is a background to that whole issue. In my own estimation, the 2 sides are giving conflicting, the 2 sides to the conflict are giving, aspects of the law that favors them. What APC is saying is that in 2022, there was a by-election. First, the Plateau State have always been in political crisis, so party crisis is not totally alien to Plateau. So this time around, it was the opposition, then opposition PDP, that was embroiled in crisis, and there was no state structure. And when you say state structure, what it means is that, see, in politics, there are 2 divides. You have the political administrator, the gatekeepers of the political party, those who run the party administration from ward to local government to state, then, of course, national, In Plateau State, they could not resolve who actually are the party executives at these different cadre. So there was the matter was taken to court. And the court, from what I learned, asked the party, People's Democratic Party in Plateau State, to go and conduct fresh congresses. Now, congresses starts from ward to local government to the state. It's at the national, we call it convention. And unfortunately, when the judiciary at the High Court in Jos intervened, the powers that be at the national perhaps feel that the court cannot be dictating to them. So they did not conduct the Congress at the ward, at the local government, at the ward, at the local government, and at the state. Now, why is this important? The ward executive, the local government executives usually form the delegates that vote during indirect primaries. And primaries can be threefold, according to 2022 Electoral Act, Section 84. You can have direct, indirect, and consensus. Now, the court says you need to have valid congresses, because if you are going to have delegates, the delegates are not going to be manufactured in Abuja, where your party national executive are. The delegates are still going, I mean, that's provided you choose the option of indirect primary. Because if you do direct primary means all valid member of the party will participate in the primaries. They will vote. There could be qualification. You could say those who have paid their dues up to date will be the one that will qualify to vote at the party primaries. That's if you do direct. Because what direct means is like what INEC is doing. You have a voting point or polling unit and put ballot boxes there, print ballot papers, just like INEC election. That's direct primary. Then indirect, which is what many of the parties do favor, will be decided by delegates. These delegates are usually the ward executive members, the local government executive members. They may well also elect delegates independent of these people, but more often than not, you have the ward executive and local government executive becoming delegates, voting for the candidate that will be sponsored at the election. Now, this is why it gets interesting. Because while the PDP is crying foul and say, look, whether we have structure or not, should not concern the judiciary. After all, the party primary is conducted by the national. Yes, it's true, but that's half truth. The party national works with the state executive to conduct the primaries, not that even if you appoint 7-man, 5-man, 3-man panel, they will not come in a vacuum. They rely on the list, the delegates list that will be supplied by who? By the state executive. Are you seeing it? So somebody in Wadata House will not just manufacture names of people in the 17 local government of Plateau State without consulting and relying heavily on the state executive. Now, the court has told you, go and conduct valid ward, local government, and state congress. I read, according to a judgment, that they only did in 2 out of 17 local government and failed to do in others. Now, it has come back to haunt the party. The party won with 125,000 votes at the governorship election. And even for the honorable members that have been sacked, the person who scored the least scored over 60,000, over and above their first runner, which means it's a massive loss because the intent of the voters has been made known. They prefer PDP. But you see, in boxing, Kayla, in boxing, there's something called technical knockout. Technical knockout is what APC is giving PDP in Plateau. Because what I learned, and reliably true, is that there was a by-election. after the death of one honorable member, there was a by-election that was conducted in 2022, which was last year, in which case the court, the tribunal, and the Court of Appeal ruled that PDP does not have candidates in that by-election because it does not have valid Congress. That should have told the party that, hey, this thing is going to hurt
Someone
our
can
chances.
latch on this.
Exactly.
And bring it up.
Because, you see, in politics, it's mutually assured destruction. You are going to be looking at the fault of your opponent in order to... Let me give you one instance. Did you know that elections have been nullified just based on the fact that INEC omitted the name and picture of a party? That party may well not have up to 50 members. But if it has a valid nomination and was unlawfully excluded, the court, you don't need senior advocates to argue that case. The court will just nullify that victory, irrespective of what the winner scores. And it is not to political parties and politicians that election is not just won and lost at the polling unit or on the field. Your qualification also matters. So in the case of Plateau, whereas the popular sentiment is that, oh, why did the court choose to, when the Court of Appeal and Supreme Court in the presidential election this year have ruled that pre-election matters and qualification is pre-election, qualifications and nomination are pre-election matter and cannot be canvassed at the post-election phase. However, in this particular instance, the controversy did not start at the primaries of the party.
It started at the congresses.
It started way back before the party primaries of 2022, in which case the party lost a chance in a by-election. And the court, from what I learned, both the tribunal and the Court of Appeal, in that instance last year, in a by-election, said PDP did not have candidate. So that should have been an indicator that they are going to be hurt in a general election if they did not conduct valid primary. However, whether they had the time on their hands or they don't have time on their hands, what the court has tried to do is to restore sanity into our electoral process. I am explaining things the way I understand it. Now, Section 134 is what the court is relying on in coming with the decision, not Section 77C, which talks about membership of a party. They are not saying, the court, from what I learned, is not saying that Mufwang and all the people who lost out are not members of PDP. What they are simply saying is that you do not have the structure to have fielded and sponsored your candidacy. And this is similar to what happened in Zamfara.
During former governor,
2019.
Former Governor Yari's time as governor.
In 2019, it was similar. When, in fact, in that particular instance, it was even that they decided not to even do any primaries and just allocate. I said they did consensus. Meanwhile, at that time, consensus was not even part of our nomination process.
And there was no INEC official involved in that particular
exactly.
Came up with
but
I want because we have quite a lot to unpack. So at least we've gotten some kind of understanding of what's going on in Plateau State. Let's move to Kano now.
In Kano, it's not about qualification per se. First, the court of first instance says that there are about 126,000 or thereabouts. I'm not too sure of the figure, but over 100,000 votes. That the ballot paper was not stamped and signed by the presiding officer. I have been involved in training of poll workers, and we always tell, even in sensitizing electorate, we've always said that your ballot paper will be invalidated on one out of these 6 points if you do not make any choice. It's invalid. if you sign or make any mark beyond thumbprinting or fingerprinting, it is invalid. If you thumbprint in between two boxes, it's invalid. If you do not have the stamp and signature of the presiding officer behind the ballot paper, is invalid. Because the whole essence of having a valid ballot, that's why when you are counting ballot paper after election, if you are not observant, there could be importation of ballot papers that are not for that polling unit or fake ones. The stamp and the signature of the presiding officer is what validates the authenticity of a ballot paper. Now, they said they discovered, after counting, that over 100,000 of this ballot paper do not have annex stamp and signature. That's number one. Number two, the court is now saying that as at the time Abba Yusuf was nominated as candidate of NNPP, he was not even a member of NNPP. He was still a member of PDP. In which case, because what happened is that in 2022 Electoral Act, that section 77 says, 77, I don't know whether A, B, or C, I can find out, but it says a month to your Congress, you must submit both the soft and hard copy of your membership register to INEC. There are two bases. Aside from that one, there's also that if you want to submit your election expenses report to INEC, or is it either annual report or election expenses report? I think it's annual report. You also must submit with your annual report, which is due on the March 31st of every year. You must submit your soft and hard copy of your party membership register to INEC. So in the instance of Abba Yusuf, it was alleged that as at the time he was nominated, he was not a member of the NNPP. Therefore, could not have been validly nominated. That is outside of the fact that the over 100,000 of his votes were invalid.
Because they don't have the stamp.
Because they don't have the stamp and the signature. So, in fact, the Court of Appeal last week was not saying, the lower court even erred by limiting itself to that invalid vote, that even Abba Yusuf was not qualified ab initio. However, the argument of the NNPP is that this is a pre-election matter. And the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court, in the case of the presidential appeal, has ruled that issues around nomination and qualification are to be canvassed at the normal court, which is the Federal High Court. Now canvassing it at post-election phase is illegitimate. In fact, that is what knocked out the petition of APM. That APM said there was double nomination of Kashim Shettima, that he did not resign from Senate by the time he was nominated. And no, he already had a nomination of a Senate before he was made the running mate to Asiwaju, and that he did not resign within the prescribed time to invalidate the earlier nomination and to now give him valid nomination. But there were evidences to the fact that he actually resigned, formally wrote to the party leadership, national, and that was communicated to INEC. But their lordship said, assuming without conceding that this guy did not even resign, did not resign his earlier nomination, that this is an issue that should have been canvassed by the at the normal court, not at the election petition. Now, why is all of this distinction? Election is sui generis. It's unique. It's neither civil or criminal trial. It's just unique for purposes of election. And that's why we have Section 285 of the Constitution, which established election tribunal. There is, if you hear of any other tribunal, it's either fake, the one that was set up by military task forces and all of that, to deal with specific instances. So when you have fake banks tribunal, for instance, is to try bank executive who has mismanaged their. So you can't take your normal case, whether criminal or civil, to such fair bank tribunal. The same thing, you cannot bring a civil suit or a criminal suit at the election tribunal. It's unique. That's why they have timeline. Section 285 of the Constitution, subsection 1 to 7, highlighted the whole parameter and gamut of election tribunal. And it's a non-global phenomenon to have election dispute resolution mechanism.
I mean, we're going to go into the judiciary in a bit, but I wanted us to have, a clear understanding of each of them. So we've done Plateau, and we're done with Kano. Yeah. Let's move to Nasarawa State.
Okay, so Nasarawa, interestingly, is like Kano, but it doesn't have the element of nomination and primaries. Both David Ombugadu of PDP and Abdullahi Sule were validly nominated. There was no controversy about their nomination. However, there was alleged irregularities in some of the polling units. And what their lordship simply did was to add and subtract. Subtract the irregular. Okay. Natasha Akpoti, how did she reclaim her mandate? It was too arithmetic of the court. They subtracted the invalid vote from the valid vote. All the places where there was overvoting and manipulation and all of that. They removed those votes and she was able to reclaim her mandate. You get? That is the same thing that happened in Nasarawa. That some of the votes given to Sule or APC governorship candidate were invalid, or there was case of overvoting and irregularities, manipulation, and all of that. And the PDP was able to prove their case. I don't want to sound prejudicial because there were also election observation reports that talk about certain irregularities in Nasarawa. But this is not a court of law. So my opinion is my opinion. I will not go into the merit or demerit. However, Abdullahi Sule remains sacked until that case is overturned at the... I think the appellate court has reserved judgment for a particular day. We do not know how that will go, but I know it will still end up at the apex court. Mark you, see, all of these cases cannot be said to be conclusive in spite of our analysis, because it is the Supreme Court that will make the final pronouncement. Before 2010 Constitutional and Electoral Act Amendment, it used to be that all cases of governorship election petition ends at the Court of Appeal. In fact, that's how we came about this off-cycle, off-season election. I hope you know that. This whole thing that started with Plateau in 2003, election of 2003 that was contentious, and then it went to court, and the court said, Chris Ngege did not win. After 3 years in court, Chris Ngege did not win. It was Plateau that won. And then, of course, INEC still conducted 2007 governorship election that produced Andy Uba. And after 7 days or 2 weeks, the court said, no, Andy Uba is not yet to return. Peter Obi has not spent the 4 years for which he has been elected. And that is how the whole off-cycle, off-season governorship election started From Anambra, it went to Ondo, Edo, Ekiti, Bayelsa, Osun. Of course, even the case in Imo, it was as a result of judicial intervention. Although that one is not, maybe in a sense, that was also as a result of election dispute resolution. So what I'm trying to tell our viewers is that this whole election dispute resolution, one, is not peculiar to Nigeria. It's a global phenomenon worldwide. Wherever democracy is practiced, there's always this window, this scheme, this whole exercise of having judicial review of elections. It happened in Kenya, it happened in Ghana, it has happened in almost all the countries that are practicing constitutional democracy. So it's nothing unique. The only thing that is unique is that, unlike in Kenya and Uganda, I've been privileged to observe election in Uganda, where you have just 2 weeks. In Uganda, the case goes to constitutional court directly. You don't go through lower court or higher court. No. In Kenya, it goes directly to Supreme Court. They call it Supreme Court, just like in our own case. But in Uganda, it's called Constitutional Court. You appeal to the Constitutional Court. Within 2 weeks, they look at the merit, and then they give a judgment. And that's the end of story. Whether you like it or not, you can only appeal to God. So what I'm saying is that whatever likes or dislikes we have about the court pronouncement, it still stands. Can be reviewed at a later date, but it stands. And people must understand that these are human endeavor that may not be perfect in its own sense. So the case of Abdullah Isule is a straightforward case. Unlike the case in Plateau, unlike the case in Kano, it's not about qualification or nomination.
It's about math.
It's about valid votes and invalid votes. So addition, subtraction, which ended up, making Abdullah Sule of APC to be the loser.
And then, unfortunately, we have to talk about Zamfara State again.
Again, Zamfara is just like Nasarawa. Zamfara is like Nasarawa because what the court has decided, unlike the earlier three we discussed, this one is not about sacking and asking somebody's certificate of return to be withdrawn and issued to another person. In the case of Zamfara, what their lordship said is that elections could not hold in about 2 local governments, and that if the election had been held in those 2 local governments, it can substantially affect the outcome of the election, given that it was close contest. So they now said, go and conduct supplementary election. Maybe we should also have talked about the different kinds of elections there are, because there is general election, there is by-election, there is supplementary election, there is rerun election, there is runoff election. So there are different types of elections. So in Zamfara, the governor may still retain his seat if after the supplementary election is still able to have majority of valid votes. So his own position is not as threatened in the real sense of it, because recall that there was also supplementary election in Adamawa and a number of other states before. In Kebbi, there was supplementary election in a number of states. During the general elections, there are still supplementary elections, because the whole concept of supplementary election comes about as a result of maybe there is violence, so election could not hold, or it's a force majeure being a natural disaster that was not envisaged, and INEC is on a sure footing to postpone election in those places. But you see, you don't manufacture results. If there are pronouncements already that this election or election has not held, you cannot then produce results for where you have said that election did not hold. How did you come about that? It may well be, like I said, it may well be that given the margin of lead, because it's the margin of lead that will determine. In the eye of the court, let me give you this instance. In the eye of the court, maybe there is, in a local government, there is 120,000 voters, but only 20,000 people collected PVC. Then in another local government, maybe there are 87,000 voters registered, but only 50,000 collected PVC. Given the normal trend of voter turnout, you don't expect even up to 50%. You get. So you will know if somebody, if supplementary election will favor somebody or it will be against somebody by virtue of the number of PVCs collected. So in Zamfara, I have not done the research as to whether those two local governments were stronghold of PDP or APC, because it will depend. Whose stronghold is it? How many votes are there? So if you look at Bayelsa election, they were saying, oh, Southern, you 120,000 registered voters. But when the results came out, it turned out that less than 20,000 people actually voted. You get. And that's the normal trend in elections, because, which is why a lot of people say that our voters register is still padded. It's still not very credible. Because, yes, there are issues with voter turnout. There are issues with voter apathy. But it will seem, in spite of the best effort of INEC to clean up the register, it will still seem that something was still done with that register. That, you know, yes, we can argue lack of good governance, issue around violence, issue of late commencement. We can give all of the normal excuses why there is low voter turnout. But it's still believed that peradventure, the voter register may not be of the highest standard. May not. I don't have the fact, but I'm just... So in Zamfara, unlike the other three we've earlier discussed, there is no... the court has only said, go and do supplementary election in those two local governments, and then the final tallies will be done. And when the final tally is done, we know whether the governor retains his seat or whether the other candidate, who is the main challenger, will be the new winner.
So let's talk about it now. So now we've gotten an understanding of what's going on in these four places. There are some issues that have been raised. Mr. Femi Falana, among the voices that have been raised, talking about courts invalidating people's votes and what this does to the confidence of the voter themselves. What do you make of that situation? Because as a voter, if I think about it, and at the end of my voting, it always kind of ends up in this situation. It casts a shadow on the competence of INEC in many ways. How are they going to be able to get people to want to vote if at the end of the matter it always goes to the courts? What do you make of this whole courts invalidating the votes of people who came out to cast their votes, and the confidence, the deficit that creates in the mind of the Nigerian? Why should I come out to vote if this is what it ends up being when we're done?
I said earlier that election dispute resolution is not peculiar to Nigeria. It's in every democracy. So we should take it that casting of ballots is just one out of several possible scenarios to recruit a leader. There's a saying in my part of the world that a cripple is said to be, not to be walking straight. He now said, you are only looking at the top. You didn't look at the foundation. What is making me not to walk straight is in my leg being bad. It's regrettable. It's unfortunate that courts have to, there was a time I was working with an organization called International Foundation for Electoral Systems. We were working, supporting democratic institutions. And we gave funds to one NGO in Lagos to do some tracking of court decisions for us in the 2007 elections. And they came they came up with a publication titled Democracy by Court Order. Now, it's unfortunate that we are having democracy not by ballot, but by court order. But if you must blame the hawk for wickedness, first ask Mother Hen, why did it expose her children to danger? Oh, you said there is democracy by court order. I agreed. It's unfortunate. It's reprehensible. It's something that should not have happened. But how well behaved are the political class of Nigeria? The way and manner they go about, I mean, you can read my thoughts on the just concluded Imo elections in this day newspaper of today. The lawyer page is there. And I wrote in my column in The Punch about my own assessment of this last governorship, 3 governorship elections. In my column last Wednesday, the title is, what was it? I gave the title was it was more like review, Musins. I said Musins on Imo, Kogi, and Bayelsa governorship elections. So it makes an interesting reading, even if I'm saying so. But it's important for us to read. Read and understand. You see, beer parlor politicking, beer parlor gossip does not influence electoral outcomes. Many of us are very emotional when we are discussing election. People will say, this is the worst country. This is, even people who have benefited from judicial intervention in the past, because they have lost this time around, they will castigate the judiciary. They will say, oh, they have sold out. In fact, they have given them money. Hey, buy for position. Calm down. I made a proverb earlier. If you must blame the hawk for wickedness, first blame Mother Hen for exposing her children to danger. Look at the case in Plateau that we earlier discussed. Why should a party facing election in front not have a structure? Now, those who belong to the PDP in Plateau are saying, what does it matter? What does it matter? Why is that the concern of the judiciary? Why should the judiciary...
it doesn't work that way.
After all, the court have said, it's our internal affairs. No, not so fast.
Things don't work that way. Yeah.
It doesn't work that way. When APC suffered immeasurably in 2019 in Rivers and in Zamfara, the opposition was clapping for judiciary. It should not be when something favors us that we should say judiciary has done well. When it doesn't favor, we castigate. I'm not a member of any political party, and I have no sympathy for all of them. They are birds of the same feather. See, I have always said the problem of Nigeria is not about it's not about the party. It's the people running the party.
So how can we get people, not people running the party, the people who cast their votes, how can we get them to trust the process that ends up in court like this?
Now, this is it. And this is where I take exception to argument that you blame INEC. Yes, INEC shares part of the blame.
Part of the blame. Because that is what the issue is.
Wait.
They had the responsibility to ensure that these issues were resolved. Whistle blow as much as... In the case of Zamfara, during Governor Yari, we were not very surprised. Nigerians were not very surprised. We expected it because INEC at the time had made so many attempts to get that situation done and had blown so many whistles about it. So people knew what was going to happen eventually. A lot of these things now are taking many Nigerians by surprise. People who came out to cast their votes in Plateau State.
I agree with you.
I remember we have been talking about voter apathy in the country for a very long time. We suddenly started seeing people have trust in the process and coming out to cast their votes, only to now be faced with this right now.
Unfortunately, we have to live with this. We have to live with it. The last election that brought Professor Chukwuma Soludo to power recorded only 10.24% voter turnout. It's very paltry, but unlike Liberia, where you need 50+1 votes to become a president, in Nigeria it's simple majority. Just have majority of valid votes and score 25% in 2.
So that's your call on this. The Nigerian just has to deal with this.
No.
We have to live with this.
We have to live with it. This is why I'm saying so. Not that I'm not being sympathetic or empathetic. The thing is this. Who are the engineers, the architects of all of these misfortunes? The political class. Okay, here you are. You are the one that makes the law for us. The Constitution, the Electoral Act. You know what you put in there. At the same time, you are trying to subvert it. Look at how, unfortunately, many people blame INEC without understanding. INEC has no role on who becomes the candidate of a party. The only role
but if the rules are not being followed, if the rules are not being followed, INEC has a responsibility to screen.
No, wait. Yes, it does have. Now, INEC cannot invalidate the nomination of anybody. Whether the person is criminal, whether the person is an ex-convict, whether the person is even facing corruption charges. You, as a party, the gatekeeper within the party, are the one that should have done proper screening of the person they are nominating, because he's riding, is contesting election under your platform. Now, this is it. INEC shares the blame, no doubt. But I'm saying the bigger culprit in all of this are the political class who fails to do the needful. When people change party platforms, even on the eve of election, when nominations are being closed, let me give you an instance. In this concluded 2023 governorship election, Senator Magnus Abe contested under APC. He lost. But he told his supporter, he said, don't worry, I'm going to be on the ballot. How did he do it? Of course, he went to SDP. And SDP, of course, all political parties have a window to substitute candidates on issue of resignation or death. That if after the close of nomination, your validly nominated candidate ab initio now withdrew from the race, like what Obieze Kwesili did, and said, I'm no longer interested. The party, if it happens, I think now it's about 90 days to election. In time past, under 2010 Electoral Act, it's 45 days. So if it's before 45 days to election under the old act, you can substitute. If it's 90 days under this current act, you can substitute. And that's how former Senator Magnus Abe came to be SDP candidate. Now, people are in SDP. Someone had already been nominated by SDP, but he was so sure that he would be on the ballot. How did he do it? There will be negotiations. Now, when you do all of this, the Section 84 of the Electoral Act says, these are the procedures you need to follow. If you are doing direct primary, if you are doing indirect primary, if you are doing consensus, it's very copiously highlighted. But you decide to short circuit, to ignore, and then say, after all, INEC has no role to play in who determines the candidate of my party. Yes, INEC has no role. Did you know what INEC suffered in this last governorship election in Bayelsa? The court said, remove Timi Presiva. He's not qualified. That was the court of first instance. He's not qualified to be the candidate of APC. INEC removed him from the list of nominated candidates. Then 2 weeks to election, the court said, reinstate Timi Presiva. They had to reinstate. That is part of the challenges the electoral management face, because they act as directed by the court. Whether the court decision is sound, unsound, missound, whatever, it obeys. So if the political class will just play by the rules, we will have less contentions that will lead to nullification of election. However, INEC has its own blame. And where does that come to? Misapplication of the rule, or lack of strict application of the rules of the game. For instance, I challenged INEC in this last Imo, Kogi, and Bayelsa governorship election. There were allegations that there are pre-filled results in some parts of Kogi. You yourself said your preliminary investigation shows that this happened in about 4 to 5 local governments. And you said you are not going to you suspended the election in those places. I had expected that information that said the election in those places where there are pre-filled results are suspended came very late in the day. It was 8 in the night. that I was here in this studio when that information came to us while I was on the panel with Mokwe and Chamberlain. And I recall I said, look, now collation has started since afternoon. Election has ended by 2:30. You are issuing a statement at 8 p.m. that you are suspending elections that have already been concluded. That is rather late. However, you also said, you know the identities of those whom you posted to those polling units. As I speak with you, no announcement has been made that those people who were involved in that activity should be arrested, investigated, and possibly prosecuted. Mom has been the word. Now, the opposition in Kogi, in Imo, are saying, look, there are overvoting. There are, manipulations. Now, the petition, they wrote, according to them, they wrote officially to petition. I had thought that the leadership of INEC would have simply taken a procedural administrative look at that petitions. Section 65 of the Electoral Act is not a decoration. It says that where wrong declaration has been made, the commission has within 1 week, to review. It may well be a preliminary review. Okay, what is the merit of this petition that has brought it? You said there are, manipulation here. You can quickly make a decision. Within 7 days, set up a small committee of 3-5 and look at it. You may find merit because now you have IRF with which to compare results that have been uploaded. And even on IRF, there are obvious cases of number of accredited voters not tallying with the number of votes in the EC8A form. Now, that should form the basis to flag such results. And say, look, this is a clear case of overvoting.
And speak up about it, because that's what the point is, Jideojo. The fact that these things, we hear about them, but the conversations about it, like you said, mom is the word in many cases. So more conversations from INEC and be out there like really loud so that voters know what to expect. We know what the irregularities are. We can say, okay, INEC said this is a situation, as opposed to people starting to feel like their votes don't count. But I'm going to see if we can circle back to that conversation in a bit. I want to talk about what the former President Olusegun Obasanjo said. Because this democracy that we are practicing in Nigeria, is it working? Is it time to have this conversation, Jide? Maybe this method is not for us. Should we be thinking up ways that we can, create our own forms of democracy? Former President Olusegun Obasanjo is actually saying this. This Western liberal democracy is not working for us. What do you make of that?
As far as I'm concerned, Baba Obasanjo is just trying to seek relevance. What that he is saying lacks merit, in my own view. Which kind of homegrown democracy do you want to have?
Rwanda will tell you that they have their own homegrown democracy.
What is homegrown? What is homegrown? They don't have election.
One that takes into cognizance the realities of
they don't have election
and the political actors that they have to deal with.
No, wait. Are you saying in Rwanda there are no elections?
They have elections.
But what is the difference?
Type of democracy that we are practicing in Nigeria,
forget my
will it work? It wasn't created. No, listen to the merits of his argument, Jideojo. His argument is basically the fact that, look, when this was created, it had in mind the political actors of the place for which it was created. This is not the same case in Nigeria. You don't think this is something we should think about?
Baba Obasanjo has been around for a very long time. He has been an head of state. It was his administration that introduced presidential system of government to us over 40 years ago. So when he was younger, when he was more cosmopolitan, when he was in the saddle, he didn't deem it to fly the flag of homegrown democracy. He himself became a beneficiary for 8 years as a presidential president. as a presidential, yes, presidential president. Now you are now condemning. See, it is not in the system. It is in the operatives of the system. We have tried parliamentary system of government in the First Republic. All this issue of independent candidacy, all this issue about allowing small parties to exist at subnational level, we had all of this under the parliamentary system. We have a prime minister, we have a governor general, and Britain is still practicing parliamentary democracy. India is practicing parliamentary democracy. And several other countries have made a success of it. So it's not about, it's like saying, oh, you cannot play football better than those who invented football. It's not true. I mean, football was invented where? Maybe in UK. Now, who has perfected the art of footballing? The Southern Americans, the Argentines, the Brazilians, and some European countries. So it's not so much about the system. Do you know that we are not even following the tenet of presidential system of government in total, the way it's practiced in US? I have been privileged to observe election in US in 2010, the midterm election. I was there live and direct. And I went around, I was in DC, I was in Virginia, I was in Maryland, in those 3 states. And I understand how they practice their... Do you know that in America, the election period is 12 hours, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Do you know that America presents you with multiple voting methods or techniques? You can do driving, you can do mail-in ballot, you can do early voting. So you and I that will be on election duty, maybe as I am a studio rat, moving from one station to the other, analyzing the election, I cannot vote. I recall that the only time I voted in this Fourth Republic was in 2015, that I have to leave the studio of NTA to go to Kubwa, where my polling unit is, to go and cast my ballot. You understand? But it was not that easy for me subsequently. So what I'm saying is this. In other climes, what other people do to have a feel and better deal for their citizenry and their electorate are not being done in Nigeria. We are still talking of diasporan voting. In 2023, Kenya has diasporan voting. In Kenya, quote me on this, prisoners vote. Prisoners, people where they prison, then they vote for Kenya. Kenya is not America. Kenya is an African country. In Egypt, where I've been privileged to observe election starts 9 a.m. and ends 9 p.m. 12 hours. And you need to see the infrastructure in Egypt. You know, when it is even that 9 p.m., it's like broad daylight because everywhere is well lit. Judges are the ones that conduct election in Egypt. Judges of court. Quote me on this. They don't have permanent voters card in Egypt. They use their national ID card. That is a system that has found its own rhythm and it's working for them. And each time I go on election observation, when I was in Ghana in 2008, I wrote about my experience. When I was in Egypt, when I was in Uganda, when I was in US, I all documented my... But people just read and pass away. Diaspora voting. Why shouldn't Nigerians in diaspora that remit billions of dollars annually back home, why shouldn't they have a say in who becomes the president of this country?
So basically you're saying it's not about the system.
It's the operators. It's those who are operating the system that manipulate it to suit their own purposes. And there are no punishment for bad behaviors, whether in INEC, whether among the political class, whether among the security agents, whether among the other stakeholders. Everybody, that is what I will call culture of impunity. Anything goes. So a winner emerges and then you say, hey! And you know, Nigeria is a system of zero-sum game. By virtue of one vote, a person defeats the opponent and becomes a maximum ruler. Zero-sum game, winner takes all. He starts dispensing favors. it becomes a
That
billionaire
conversation
overnight.
about punishing bad behavior is one that has to be had, but we do have to wrap it up there. Mr. Jide Ojo, thank you so much for being with us on Political Paradigm. I know you have a lot of work ahead of you. Good luck with all of that as well.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to Nigerians on this. I hope we'll behave ourselves. It's all in our hands, not the system. We, the operators of the system, must get our house together, irrespective of whatever system we operate. If we are not ready for attitudinal change to allow for due process, monarchy was there for centuries before we came to
We do have to let it go there. But thank you very much, Mr. Jide Ojo. We have been speaking with Mr. Jide Ojo, veteran political analyst, public affairs analyst, and newspaper columnist. That's Political Paradigm this week. Remember, you can catch episodes of the program on YouTube via channelstv.com and keep the conversation going. Thank you for watching. I am Kayla Megwa. See you next time.